blue button, I should be live. You should be able to hear me. Hello, chat. Hello, everyone. I've got a cold cup of tea because I made myself a lovely cup of tea, which I have to say it's delicious. It's just where you've got a little bit of tannin. Whoa. Just enough that the first sip takes the bitter edge off it, and the rest of the tea is just... You know exactly what type of cup of tea I'm talking about. Just when the rest of it is just, perfectly flavoursome and fragrant and delicious. Just marvellous. But it's cold because I made it and got distracted by rapidly setting up rail natter. I've had fun all day designing a depot, so I've been having a tremendous fun day job times. But it meant that I had no time at all to do any of the things I was supposed to do, including the thing I was supposed to do yesterday evening, which is, anyway, it's fine. So, how are you all doing? You all well? Hello. It's rail natter time. It's whale natter. Yes, it's the second Welsh rail natter in a row. It's always good, right? Tinyawn, everyone. You're well. Yeah, good. I get my I end up going a bit Welsh if I get too distracted thinking about being Welsh. Yeah. I get slightly code shifted to getting a bit more Welsh when I'm down in Aberystwyth. It definitely happens. Well, I haven't been hello to all Aberystwyth friends I haven't seen for ages. I miss you a lot. Anyway, right, enough with waffling. Let's crack on, shall we? Because everyone's saying you can hear. I'm not telling you what depot. Sorry, everyone, because hashtag absolutely cannot tell you that. Otherwise, I'd have to kill you all. So, no COVID numbers tonight because... I didn't have time to pull the stats up, and I think, to be honest, it's not going to tell us anything new. Let's wait until they start pitching upwards again. So. Right. Next. People are pointing out that ADHD is like hot drinks getting cold is a classic symptom of ADHD. Yes, can confirm. Right. The news. Benelli Viaduct is mostly has mostly been reopened for people to plod across, which is nice, and cycle across. I say mostly because you can only access one half of it easily. The other half, I think there are stairs to get off it, but you can't get your bike down it very easily because it would cost an extra 400 grand. Basically, the best part of £500,000 to build a thing that would safely get you up to the level of the viaduct at the other end. So, mostly reopened. Definitely something to go and visit. It's fantastic structure. I just want to go and look at it. It's brilliant. Obviously featured twice in The Architect of the Railways Built, which is nice. That's nice. It's good. The Iron Giant has mostly reopened. Marvellous. Just for those who aren't familiar, it's a fantastic example of lattice sort of trestle structure with these sort of cast and wrought iron. It's cast. I think the supports are properly old cast iron stuff. It's just glorious. Anyway, it's a glorious structure. It's been very carefully and lovingly restored for people to kind of safely get across. It's brilliant. Go and look at it. Send pictures. Yes, it's just some absolute king shit for the news here, which is one of the most bizarre fashion collaborations, but just made perfect by the presence of our special boy, Francis Bourgeois. Here he is. Anyone who hates on Francis, send them in my direction and I'll sock him one, because so wholesome. They're particularly on Facebook, less on Twitter, but actually I go into the replies to tweets that Francis is popular tweets that Francis is mentioned in, and I have to open them in a way that means that I can go past all the blocks, because invariably there are people who have blocked me who are just there hating on him. In fact, there are 2 or 3 accounts in particular that just find every Francis tweet they can and they just send bile and hatred. Those people can go to hell. Because it's just people who are butthurt that he has absolutely cracked making train culture and railway culture and railway enthusiasm culture massively into the mainstream in a way that no one else ever has succeeded in doing. And not in the way that I do, like by talking about engineering and sort of contextualizing the politics, right? Just by raw train spotter enthusiasm, and all power to him. Lots of love for this guy. For anyone who doesn't know who Francis is, go search Francis Bourgeois. There's a video associated. There's a little article you can go on to. That's this ridiculous. Oh, the ridiculous fashion collaboration is the North Face that make what used to be high quality and is now fairly cheap outdoor kit, and Gucci. Gucci, I am a Gucci, as everyone knows from the film. How on earth is he being nominated for awards off that performance? Worse than Pacino. Anyway, sorry, I digress horribly. Just so, and the fact there's a collaboration between the North Face, Gucci, and Francis is just mind-blowing. I love it. I just absolutely love it. Everything about this is joyous. So those gatekeepers who think that the form of train spot, that don't like that Francis has made it popular, do one. So just all the love for Francis. What else is in the news? Well, I generally start with happy stuff and then go downhill. The very light train, the VLR is back in the news again. This time with a different vehicle. I'm getting more confused because I thought, so there's this thing, which is the Revolution VLR, which this is a thing, but also this thing is clearly also a thing. But is this just a mock-up that's actually going to turn into this, or is this a separate thing? I've got lost. I don't know. I've been asking for them to come and appear, and it's on again, off again. I think they're because they're busy, and it's kind of it's clearly a bit politically fractious as well. But please, if you have, if the Coventry people in the Coventry VLR people, I want to talk to you for a rail natter. Come and find me. I've been emailing you and then getting nowhere. I kind of get replies, and it's like, yeah, definitely, and then I hear nothing. Please, I want to talk. I want to tell everyone about what's going on. But yes, for those who are pointing out, this looks like a pod. So there's a bit of a discussion happening on the Twitters about what this is and how this is classified. So there are two things here. I don't know. So this is a people mover. This is also a people mover, but this is more like a streetcar people mover, whereas this is a light rail people mover, like a Parry people mover. These are two different things. Streetcar is like a one-vehicle, old-fashioned... It's like an updated, snazzy version of the San Francisco streetcars, like the really old one-car trams, which don't have very good capacity, but they are very light and fairly straightforward. This is just like a Parry people mover, which has like... You use a knackered railway and you put these on it and run them back and forth. These are different, and I'm confused as to what's going on, and I've got lost. So the VLR people, come and tell me what's going on. No, this thing here has just got little wheels. So there's this one, which is just basically an update of the Pacer. It's a bit of like an update of the Pacer concept of a very, very light vehicle, except that it's got bogies. They've actually gone for standard freight bogies at this one. I said this last time, didn't I? I've just nicked this off the news in the past. They've used standard freight bogies to avoid doing too many new things all at once, but the actual body shell is very light per metre of length, or per passenger, if you like, per seat. But this is something totally different. This thing looks like a people move. It looks like an airport transporter. I don't know anyway. But it's been in the news again, and it's a rehashed pressy, which I never like. Ugh. Stop doing transport presses without interrogating them. The BBC's particularly bad for this because the BBC's getting stripped of funding constantly. Anyway, VLR. What else is in the news? We always go downhill on this. So. Government pays polluters billions. It's been in court. It's been lost in court. Basically, government was taken to court over the fact that since the Paris Agreement has paid fossil fuel companies £14 billion in subsidies, de facto subsidies, and the court challenge was that should be illegal given the Paris Agreement. The court found that wasn't the case because obviously they were, but. They did in the process of that court case. It became public record that government does indeed pay polluters billions. That was accepted as true in court. So mixed blessings out of this one. All credit to the campaigners who are getting involved in this. Really good, kind of really. Yeah, there's a mixture of like XR people get involved. Like this feels like a positive thing. Fine, it's raising awareness, but also lots of people who are kind of XR adjacent or non-XR getting involved in this. Lots of young people. It's good stuff. So, government pays polluters billions. On the flip side, obviously government is hiking rail fares again. Here's Louise Hay. Not making this up. The rail minister claimed... Hay or Haig? Louise, I speak to you... I can never remember which it is. People in the chat, correct me. Anyway, so... there's lots of chat going on. Lots of red names have appeared. No, it's not going in a vacuum tube. Don't worry about that. It's fine. Right. Yes, sorry. Yeah, there's going to be a 3.8% fare hike again. And this bizarre claim that it will make rail travel more attractive because at least it wasn't 4.8%. Utterly bizarre. Just as I keep pointing out, this government is just hostile to solving climate change, actively hostile. 2022 is going to be the year where the cross-party consensus on climate action disappears, by the way. So look forward to that. So, what else is in the news? Oh, yeah, so if we're talking about government and its attitudes to rail in particular, don't buy any of their reverse beaching bullshit because they, as an example of the only line that all the reverse beaching stuff so far has just been dusting grass off a railway that's still been there already, essentially. It's a slight exaggeration, but it is, to all intents and purposes, that is the case. Whereas anywhere that requires actual physical work, for example, the reinstatement of the line to Portishead, which has been knocking around for years and years and years, is still not happening because government has very little interest in it. And obviously that means that people who like busways, are suggesting, don't do a railway, do a busway. Like, well, no, don't do a busway. It should just be a railway. Fine. It's Bristol. It's a massive city. It should have an electrified suburban railway network. Come on. Anyway, so the idea of that, it just shows that any idea of reverse beaching, as the Tories keep claiming they're doing, being anything other than the nastiest and most cynical of taglines, just call it out. Call it out, folks. Right, that's the end of the news. So, last time we were talking last time to Rebecca Wilkes, who was a fantastic guest. Thanks so much, Rebecca, for coming on. And we brought this tweet up from Mick. And Mick was saying, he's a Labour Assembly member, and he was saying, well, the key line in here is actually this one. The one that angers me most is this line. I'm going to play his video that he put up later on, which is less irritating. But this line here, this line kind of between, there is absolutely no credible argument that HS2 directly benefits Wales. Well, okay, there's the get out of jail free card is this one here, which is the word directly. But this is nonsense. Like, there are direct benefits from HS2 for Wales, and the whole point of this episode is going to be exploring it, exploring why. But perhaps less on the technical explaining why, as some people might hope, although chuck your questions at me this whole time, and I'll try and pick them up. But it's going to explore the context of the question, so it's going to expand on the discussion that Rebecca and I had at the end of the episode about the political context for this. We're going to talk about the Barnett formula. We're going to talk about unionism versus nationalism in the kind of the less fash sense. We're just going to kind of explore this all. Sorry, I'm highlighting things. There's a red squiggle, which you'll see appearing. There's a red squiggle that's been drawn here, there, in that area. Yeah, you'll see me scribbling. So yes, we're going to explore that. So this tweet is essentially, and all the discussion that happened is, I'm presuming, but I've not come across Mick before. I'm presuming Mick has plenty of good things to say. Welsh Labour are, like, not perfect, but they're, as far as I can tell, they're a much more robust force than any other Labour kind of structure within the UK. Like, they're doing better than the National Labour Party. They exist compared to Scottish Labour. So Mick's probably got plenty of good stuff to say. But on this, he's kind of making his own bed and there's a risk that he's going to have to lie in it. And we're going to explore why in tonight's episode of Rail Natter. And as the Intercity 225 fades away, let's before we kick off, let's just do a bit of a brief addendum, because I'm going to go big face here. Hello everyone. Hello. The big news, obviously, is not news at all, and I don't think it's going to happen, which is about Boris being pushed off a cliff by the rest of the Conservative Party. I'll believe it when I see it. People are asking if there's any chance of Professor Mark Berry coming on and defending himself. I don't think there's need to. I don't want it to become a tit for tat. We'll get on to Professor MB later on. Anyway, big face was just to say, I don't care what happens to Boris. I kind of want to enjoy it, but I'm enjoying it less than all the chaos that was happening under Theresa May, to be honest. So there's just the miserable idea that if he goes, someone reasonably more malevolent and competent will appear afterwards. So I'm getting no pleasure from the chaos. So we're going to just park the chaos. We're also going to park Big Face. Right. HS2. Right. Yes. People are asking if I've... Oh, yeah, my fingernail. Oh, yeah, this episode and last episode. No, big shout out to Georgia, who did my nails a couple of weeks ago. But it's sadly wearing off. It says wearing off, which is a bit of a shame. Yeah. She did a very good job, particularly on the green. She did a fantastic job on the green. It's really, really nice, even coat that's now wearing off quite nicely, quite pretty. Anyway, sorry, yeah, let's go back to small face again. HS2. So, perhaps it's worth very, very briefly reminding ourselves about what HS2 was before the IRP butchered at it. Because Matt Reed just asked a question about HS2 relieving the eastern leg. We'll get there in a second. So here is a fairly sizable chunk of England, largely the Midlands and the south part of the north, plus almost all of Wales. We've chopped Barry and Penarth off, but never mind. And obviously skipping out the southwest. But there's a chunk of England and most of Wales here. And here's HS2. Here's HS2 Phase 1, London to Birmingham. HS2 Phase 2A, going up to Crewe. Phase 2B, the western leg, connecting Manchester. And actually, this bit, the IRP has got rid of this. This is gone now. Bye-bye. The Goulburn link is gone, so now it's going to rely on... there's just going to be this bit. And they've got rid of... Oh, I'm doing green on red again. I'm scribbling up here, and I've scribbled out this bit. So this bit up here, the Goulburn link is gone. Out of the IRP. Thanks, IRP. Anyway, and also then the eastern leg, which, as we know, has gone as well. So to answer your question, Matt, now that the eastern leg has gone, no, the East Coast Main Line will get no relief whatsoever by HS2. So all of the benefits that you get on the East Coast Main Line are now gone. Totally gone. IRP has killed those off. And then obviously NPR, which is gone as well. So thanks IRP. But if we consider this is the kind of the overall map of what it should have looked like. There we are. That's just that bit there. If we imagine what it should have looked like, which is before they chopped it back to this, then you can see that there's HS2. That's what it does. It provides capacity release on... actually, I'm going to change... Let me change pen colour here. It's just not good enough, is it? Pointer options. Let's go for it. Let's go for like a nice light blue. Will that work? Will that be nice and clear? How's this going to be? Nope, that's completely impossible. Let's go for a yellow, shall we? Pointer options. Let's go for a nice yellow. Yeah. How's that going to work? Is this nice and visible? Let's see. Yeah, that's better. So, obviously the original was providing capacity release down the East Coast Main Line. So there's the East Coast Main Line doing its thing there. There's the East Coast Main Line, Hartford Loop. Not Hartford Loop. That's the East Coast. So that's the East Coast Main Line. And the Midland Main Line as well. So that's the Midland Main Line doing that, and then this, and then this, and that, and also that, and then up there, and then golly, it's a mess through the old Sheffield, and then through there, and then da. So that's the MML, which it provides capacity release on, and then obviously the West Coast Main Line as well, along here. So actually the West Coast Main Line going like this. And then which way does it go? I can't remember which one is the main one. And then it goes, and then Trent Valley actually does this, but also the non-Trent Valley bit does this. There we go, and then sort of this into Crewe, and then it also does this like that. And then onwards, and then kind of north of here, no release. But the point is that's the West Coast Main Line. So you get the release on whichever this. I can't remember which side it is there. Whichever release you get, the pre-IRP plan provides capacity release on these three north-south main lines and basically everything connecting to them, because invariably the services that freight and passenger services that are connected on all these sort of bits, the connecting bits, all also get relief because they run through major junctions or stations. So you get this trickle down of release capacity that has just not been modelled really to any great detail. There's been some element of modelling on phase 1 between Birmingham and London. There has been limited attempts to model what release capacity might look like. But to be fair, there's only so much you can model, because phase 1 doesn't do much more than just adding a pair of fast lines on the West Coast Main Line, let's face it. So that bit has had some level of modelling. But the reason I'm scribbling all of this is because that is how nebulous these benefits trickle in all over the place. And that's what's really important to remember in this episode, is that those benefits trickle all over the place, trickling all over the place, absolutely everywhere, because of those that release in the big stations, which in turn releases bottlenecks that cause delays and impacts to reflect around the whole network, a network that is not very resilient at the moment. So, trickle. What about Wales? So
the UK government is investing just under £100 billion in HS2 rail infrastructure from London to Birmingham. Now, out of that funding, we should be entitled to our population share of 5%, which is £5 billion. Scotland is getting £10 billion, but because the UK Tory government says that the line from London to Birmingham is going to benefit Wales, I can't see how that happens. We are therefore to get nothing from them. So all we're asking for is our fair share of the investment that is available for rail infrastructure for Wales.
So I don't actually disagree with anything in that video, other than the idea that it doesn't. There's no benefit to. He kind of alludes to it less. It's more explicit in his tweet. He just alludes to the idea of there not being direct benefit in the video. I actually don't disagree with any of that, and we're going to kind of unpick this, because the whole point is that is in this HS2 versus Wales false argument, is that you end up fighting that battle rather than fighting the proper argument to be made, which is that Wales does not have remotely a fair share of funding for transport at all. Just that there's not remotely a fair amount of funding for transport in Wales, not even close. This is hopefully I'm going to unpick that in this episode. So it's not going to be about the specifics of what benefits there are, although I will go through that in some kind of a bit of detail. But it's not going to be about that, because I think you can make the case better by actually unpicking that video a bit in relation to Barnett consequentials than actually looking at the specific details of what particular capacity release you get. But I will look at that, don't worry. So I've already talked about this tweet and why this tweet, less than the video. The video I don't mind so much. As I say, most of what's in the video I agree with. There are some falsehoods in there. So the first falsehood is the idea, and I've seen it repeated. I'm not going to directly address this falsehood. Well, I am. I just don't have a slide for it because I forgot to put it in. It's a constantly repeated nonsense, which is that HS2 is taking away funding from Welsh transport, which is bollocks. It is just not a correct argument. In much the same way as HS2 is not taking money away from the existing railway network. It isn't. Government is deciding not to spend money, but at no point does government sign off a cheque that says the headline amount of a project's capital. All the government does is spends a certain amount on a load of bits and pieces every year that it signs off a certain amount. So for HS2 it might be 2, might be 3 billion. For Network Rail it's 4, 5, 6, 7 billion. Total expenditures between 5 and 7 billion, depending on how many capital projects are going on for Network Rail. Crossrail is signing off a certain amount of money. Central government is signing off the annual amount, essentially, the amount that's rolling out of Treasury's coffers, even though that also isn't how it works, actually. It doesn't happen that there's a pile of money that gets siphoned off and sent away. That isn't how it works. But at no point is there a 100 billion cheque being signed off. And so the argument that Wales is losing money as a result of it, that let's just immediately... I'm not going to even get a slide because as an argument, it's a false argument. We're just ignoring it. It's just a nonsense argument. Don't make it. If you're making that argument, as someone who followed me on Twitter and is ostensibly a transport professional, but I've muted because you're a pain in the backside, stop saying that stop using Trump-style tweets. I'm looking at you, person who was tweeting earlier. Stop doing that because... you are misleading people by saying that HS2 has no benefit for Wales, as I'm going to point out. Anyway, stop waffling. Political context is key. So go back, if you haven't already, go back and watch episode 96, particularly the last section, which is the Cardiff versus Westminster section, and why HS2 has become a bit of a battleground. We'll wait. Everyone, are you willing to wait for people to go back and watch that? Yeah, let's do that. If you watched it, good, excellent. Thanks for watching that. Right, so let's talk about this chap here, Joel Barnett, who died a few years ago. Joel Barnett. Now, what did Joel Barnett give us? Well, in 1978, we had a Labour government, and we were coming up to... Did we? Yeah, we did. We were coming up to... we were coming up to the demise of said government, but also with this thing, we were increasing devolution. And there was... we knew that this was happening in 1979. There was going to be a push for more devolution. This buoyed English nationalism, which probably helped Thatcher a bit in 79, but also... there was a bit of a panic. It's like, what are we going to do about funding? How are we going to work out who, if there's devolution and we're divvying up funding powers, we need to kind of work out a way to divvy up fund. If we're spending money in Scotland, we probably need to then spend an equivalent amount of money as part of the devolution settlement in Northern Ireland or in Wales and vice versa. So Joel Barnett came up with a formula, and it's called the Barnett formula. And the Barnett formula is... dubious at best, but it's a load of sort of snarly percentage-y calculations to result in the result of the formula gives you a consequential, which is an amount of funding that the parts that aren't getting the original funding get off the back of said original funding to justify the devolution settlement, to kind of satisfy the requirements of the devolution settlement. Now, what of the Barnett formula? Well, some quotes. Timothy Edwards in 2001 pointed out that there is no legal standing or democratic justification for the Barnett formula. I dare say he might well have done that from the point of view of... No. Actually, this was done for the House of Commons library, so that would have been done from a position of a non-partisan position. No legal standing or democratic justification. Who else can we get to quote to get a quote for what the Barnett formula is? Joel Barnett himself in 2014 called the Barnett formula a terrible mistake. The Barnett formula is a political tool that can be twisted to whatever the incumbents in Westminster decide they want to do with it. There is no legal framework for it. It's if you like, a gentleman's agreement, and as we know, there is no such thing as a gentleman in Britain. So certainly not in British politics. So the idea that this thing is a valid basis for deciding on what funding should be going to different parts of the country is really problematic. And we can see that this whole episode is going to explain why that, give one small example of the failures of the Barnett formula, but it goes for so many other things as well. So yeah, exactly. It's based on population, not need, and population is not a way to decide on. Population is not a way to decide on how much investment places get. It really is not. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you invest in only high population density areas, it's going to be greatly at the expense of the regions, as we have seen and continue to see. So, and for context, let's remind ourselves that at the moment we have a government that is panicking about increased sentiment for the breakup of the UK. The United Kingdom as a concept is doomed, rightly so, and the Union Connectivity Review for transport was an attempt at pulling it back together and going, but if we make transport better, then people are going to have more of a pro-union sentiment than they do now, which I think is flawed and way over-optimistic. Simon Wadsworth is pointing out, the funny thing is that due to an error in population for Scotland, it means that they get a bigger bonus or a cut if UK government changes spending. Barnett formula problem is it's not based on need. Yeah, so everyone's pointing out the fact that it's not based on need. It's not based on an actual... it's not based on understanding what the transport needs are. In transport, for example, it's not based on understanding what the transport needs are for a given region and then providing funding based on those needs. For example, driving more modal shift or getting a certain percentage of people access to public transport. It's not based on that. It's based on it's if you can write it as a formula, then it's probably not a good way to be deciding on strategic funding for 2 million people. So here we go. So yeah, and this gets heated politically. The discussions at Barnett Consequentials get very heated very quickly. I just want to point out that it's bobbins, and it's not a good basis on which to if you had no Welsh devolution, it would be not a good way to decide how much to invest in Wales as a region. For Wales as a devolved country, as a devolved principality, it is not a good way for Wales to get funding either. And actually, it's worth me setting out my stall. Wales should have substantially more devolved power and substantially more devolved funding as well. It should have substantially more access to funding. Actually, ideally, all of the regions, including England being split into federal regions, by the way, should have the ability to raise money directly themselves. They shouldn't have to do it through Treasury. They should be able to borrow against, borrow from the Bank of England directly themselves. We need a much weaker national government in the UK, and we need a much stronger regional government. Because if you look to the countries that do transport far better, particularly in terms of suburban transport networks, they have much stronger regions. France, Germany have and the Netherlands have much stronger regional government. We talked about this in the Institute for Government episode, actually, so skip back to that. It's a very long one, but it was quite interesting. Anyway, right. So the context is that we have a government that hates devolution. Cameron was quite pro-devolution. May, agnostic, she was preoccupied with whatever it was that was going on then. Boris, and particularly the cabal behind Boris, hate devolution. They absolutely hate it. They want rid of it. They want to destroy it. And so that's why we're seeing TFN getting stripped of powers. That's why we've seen Midlands Connect getting kneecapped. It's why we're seeing these arguments with Scotland and then particularly with Wales at the moment. So let's talk about HS2, Scotland and Wales. So let's kind of go back to the video and unpick what was in the video. So there are some contradictions here, right? Some interesting contradictions. When it comes to HS2, Westminster, I've said government. I should actually, let me tell you, I can do this right now because I have the power. Westminster. There we are. Westminster. There we go. Perfect. We have the power. So when it comes to Scotland, for HS2, Westminster predicts benefits. Why? This is a dreadful slide. HS2 benefits. There, that's better, isn't it? Far better. Westminster predicts HS2 benefits for Scotland, and yet gives Scotland a 10 billion consequential. However, for Wales, Westminster has predicted, despite the fact that Westminster predicts in its own business case analysis, predicts no benefits for Wales from HS2. That's its own analysis. We'll unpick that momentarily. And actually, some reports have suggested a disbenefit to places like Cardiff. Westminster is also calling HS2 an England and Wales project. Oh, I'm missing a. This is why. Yeah, there we are. I'm missing it there. Good. Oh God, just dreadful. Calls HS2 an England and Wales project and gives Wales no consequential. So there is no consequential going to Wales as a result of HS2. Northern Ireland does get a consequential. I don't think it gets much of a consequential because it's population based, but it does get a consequential. Westminster predicts no HS2 benefits, yet calls HS2 an England and Wales project and gives Wales no consequential. This is what I mean by the Barnett formula being a political tool. As a result of an entirely kind of partisan business case analysis. Well, a business case analysis is useless for a railway line, a rural railway line, let alone a strategic piece of infrastructure that spans the country. I've already talked about this ad nauseum over and over again. And so the idea that there's an interesting question that Matt Reed's just asked about Wales being an independent country and costs, which I'll come back to because it's a very interesting one. So Wales, Westminster predict no, but this shows the Barnett formula is entirely political because Westminster decided to call HS2 England and Wales project. Because entirely in the face of the analysis that's been done according to their own business cases, they are not giving Wales a consequential. It doesn't make any sense. So here is a picture of a map, a nice satellite view of Britain. Ignore the fact that the Borders Railway, or the bit of the Borders Railway that hasn't been built yet, is there. It's because I've nicked these slides from a presentation I gave, which I will turn into a Rail Natter soon, by the way. It's going to be a cheap and easy Rail Natter episode when I've run out of ideas or I'm knackered and haven't got a guest lined up. Ignore that. So the first thing I'm going to address is, before we get on to talking about the benefits and the disbenefits and those and the various layers of nonsense in the kind of the formal, the not just the business case analysis, but also the justification of consequentials and the actual practical benefits. Let's talk about what would happen if Scotland, or let's talk about if they'd have access to more money if the bit this side and the bit this side became their own country. And the answer is whether they'd have more money to spend if they became their own country. The answer is, to my understanding, no, because if economists come in and correct me on this one, please. Because they'd be using either euro or sterling, they wouldn't have their own currency. They wouldn't have their own currency sovereignty, which means that they would not be, that the governments would not be borrowing money from themselves, which would mean that it would be much more difficult for them to borrow large sums of money in the way that the UK can currently borrow an indefinite amount of cash, essentially, without any problems. The limitation isn't in the amount of cash that the government can borrow; it's more in how quickly that money could then be spent, practically. So that's my understanding, is that there are, and pro-independence people might challenge me on this. Bearing in mind, I'm at best agnostic these days. I'm increasingly of the idea that I don't care for the United Kingdom and its longevity anymore. When the angry nationalists who are fighting against HS2 were arguing against me, they obviously pushed me back the other way. It's the same with the really angry, fetid Scotnats who do it. It's like they're the most unappealing. They do the best job of pushing people back to becoming pro-union. Anyway, so no, I don't think that Scotland and Wales independent would be in a better financial situation necessarily, but they would have more autonomy in terms of powers, and there's all sorts of other reasons why that's potentially financially not a bad thing, and so on and so forth. Anyway, that's kind of by the by, and to be honest, I'm not equipped to answer that question in much more detail, and I might have got that wrong. Feel free to kind of tackle me on that. So if you put HS2 here, right? So we're thinking about Scotland at this moment. You put HS2 here. When you get north of Wigan, so from here onwards, there's the HS2 trains are going to be using the existing network, right, going up into Scotland, which means that, okay, in terms of benefits, Scotland gets improved journey times. Great, that's nice, but that's it. Oh, and okay, it gets new trains, which I suppose also merits a smiley face, maybe kind of a slightly less aggressive smiley face. So new trains, improved journey times. Okay, great. That's it. There's no funding in place for expansion of Glasgow Central. There's nothing about kind of bypass lines anywhere. Nothing else. Arguably, you'd be also, of course, to achieve the journey time benefits. What that means is reduced capacity for non-HS services. It also means kind of fewer local services, and what else? Less freight. This is what Scotland gets from HS2 as HS2 currently stands. HS2, and this comes back to the IRP and why the IRP has been allowed to become a thing, is because government is upset. It just is totally stupidly single-minded over, and it's only as a result of how crap WebTag is, which is the transport appraisal guidelines that you establish business cases for transport, trying to fit journey time, which is all off journey time. So WebTag is pretty much entirely built off improved journey times. So trying to build a business case that makes sense for a strategic piece of infrastructure like this off business times it is just hopeless. It's a disaster. I should have put a screenshot from Alan Cook's stock take back when he was in charge of HS2. He did a stock take and he addressed this point. He said that it doesn't include so many benefits, the business case. It just really looks at journey times. So by looking only at journey times, it looks like a good news story. So you're like, from here onwards, it's like, oh yeah, tick, that's nice. But down here, that's bad, that's bad. These are bad things. Essentially, Scotland, and this is one of the things I find hardest to argue, is the benefits of HS2 for Scotland. Honestly, very difficult, because frankly, It's a bit touch and go as to whether there are any benefits for Scotland from HS2. Yes, you've got the new trains, you've got the journey times, but actually, as it stands currently, the argument I make is that I'm not existing within a project time. I'm looking for the future. I'm looking towards the fact that actually the benefits for Scotland are when high-speed segregation is extended up to the central belt. HS2 is beneficial because it'll mean that you've got the full high-speed connection, you get rid of domestic flights, you release capacity on the whole network as a result of the finished article. But as it currently stands, HS2 does not offer Scotland benefits. So if you exist within it, I'm only going to imagine a world where the projects that this nasty government have put forwards are the world that is going to exist in 40 years, then HS2 doesn't offer benefits. The only way it offers benefits, where I make my arguments, is as part of a picture. It's the starting block, the building block, the first piece of expanding high-speed segregation around the country, particularly up, to the central belt, and actually, eventually, when it comes to Wales, down to certainly to Cardiff, and then to Bristol as a justification for a new Severn tunnel. We'll get there. Anyway, this ultimately means that, contrary to government's business case stuff, as we've discussed, as we're about to discuss, so if you can imagine that means, if you look at the Scotland rail map, I did a bigger one of these, didn't I? So here's Scotland. Ignore borders, just ignore that. It's an Easter egg for anyone who's interested. So HS2 trains will whiz up the West Coast Main Line. They'll go up into Glasgow Central, and they will go up into Edinburgh, and in doing so, on the West Coast Main Line, there, and the West Coast Main Line there, and also on the kind of the what is that? I can't remember what the ELR is, but anyway, basically on the lines, the mid-Calder lines, aren't they? These are the mid-Calder line. These lines will be clogged up by HS2 trains, as will Glasgow Central, as will Waverley. Clogged up by long trains, causing a headache, and as the plans currently stand. So my argument is that, as plans currently stand, I'm not going to type this all out now. No HS2 benefits for Scotland. Okay, Scotland. There we are. Controversial, right? Oh, I put my face is in front of it. It doesn't matter. It's just as plans are now. Ish. You can argue that there's still journey time improvements, and that's sort of useful, and blah, 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 blah. But I, for me, as someone who's like massively like pro local, for me, the reason HS2 is a good thing is because of its the fact that it represents a local transport revolution. I don't really care about the journey time benefits. I think they're a very useful side effect. They justify you getting rid of domestic flights, but they aren't in and of themselves the major benefit. The major benefit is local services. Scotland has let's say a marginal benefit at best. Let's say that marginal benefit at best. And if you look at the kind of the rail map, the service, Scotland has no good, nice service maps. Partly because the network's a bit more complicated than Wales. Wales has a really nice service map, which I'm going to bring up in a minute. You can imagine you've got issues kind of. Oh, that's the yellow. Anyway, you've got a mess down here. You've got messes. Let's get a different pen color. Pointer options. Let's get a nice purple one up. Let's do that. So you're clogging up Glasgow Central, you're clogging up Edinburgh Waverley, you're clogging up the lines down here and up here, actually making a bit of a mess of services in Scotland. Skip to Wales, however, and it's a different story, because yes, HS2 trains will replace the current London-bound services, but they'll be running more frequently, and they also do things like splitting at Carstairs, although I don't know whether that's still actually in the plan. So yes, they're kind of going to be sitting in amongst where the current services are. But for example, a real challenge at the moment for the freight industry is the fact that there is currently what's called a rebaselining of so down. I've just coloured a big purple dot on top of Carlisle in both directions from Carlisle. Big arrow being drawn in both directions here. There's what's being called that for the HS2 timetable. There's what's called a rebaselining happening, a rebaselining of the timetable, and to get the proposed HS2 timetable, they're looking at reducing the number of freight paths on the West Coast Main Line. The West Coast Main Line is the freight connection between Scotland and England, so that's a problem. It's a real problem. So anyway, let's go back to Wales, where they've got this lovely network map showing where all the services go. Now, some issues here. Firstly, you'll notice that there's Birmingham New Street. You also notice this is Manchester Piccadilly. And to a lesser extent, admittedly, here's Crewe. Yes. Now the thing that unifies these three stations is that all of them are being rebuilt ish by HS2, or replaced. Obviously, in the case of Brum, because you're getting the new Curzon Street terminal station. Lovely. What a dreadful sketch. Anyway, those three stations. Now, what you'll notice is that quite a lot. You've got the services out to the Cambrian line, which doesn't represent a huge population, but does is certainly a lifeline. You've got perhaps more. I'd say, well, not perhaps, definitely more importantly, you've got the connecting services that run up into Chester and then out towards Holyhead. So you've got the kind of those services there that running that way. Crewe is a particularly important connection. It's a connection for people kind of around this whole area of the kind of the northeast, this sort of the Borderlands line, and then the Northwest Main Line, the North Wales Main Line, sorry, and then Manchester Piccadilly, which again is connected in Chester, Manchester Piccadilly. All of these, sort of these three, are all interconnected in the way that the service patterns all relate with each other, and even if you have. Even if you consider the fact that the majority, a lot of these remain fairly self-contained. So the Cardiff to Holyhead route, for example, is kind of isn't affected by that. North Wales Main Line can be separated from Pick and Crewe. But the reflection, the kind of the ripple effects you get from delays invariably ripple their way through Wales and cause impact. So not only are you getting the benefits, the reason people pick on so I use the Aberystwyth example not because it's the most important thing for Wales, but because it's the least. It's a trivial thing, but it shows a benefit echoing right out to kind of miles away from kind of any miles away from HS2. This is why I use the Aberystwyth example, because it's so far from HS2. And yet it's gaining a benefit. People again go, yeah, but the thing that's a constraint on the Cambrian line is the fact that it's single track most of the way. And yeah, but double tracking the Cambrian line is easy, and you could do that in a few years. It's a project that you could finish doubling the whole thing in 10 years, and it would cost less than less than the price of Curzon Street. Whereas building a high-speed line requires enormous lengthy amounts of kind of, processes of the design, the consultation, is decades and decades and decades. Whereas doing something like doubling, in terms of like practically doubling that line should take a lot less and would cost a lot less. So we're operating on different timescales here. For me, I'm looking at 2050 as a horizon. Likewise, North Wales Main Line. A lot of people say, having done work on certain parts of the Welsh railway network over the last sort of various, quite 3 or 4 years now, I've worked on various bits of the Welsh rail network. When we're looking at new stations or potential service upgrades, invariably I find myself coming up to this station and this station and this station as a constraint. As our subcontractors that we get in to do some of the modelling say, oh, actually that's reliant on paths freed at Birmingham or paths freed at Piccadilly. So it always comes back to these stations, which are having massive amounts of capacity released at them by HS2. So it just is not viable to say that there is no benefit to Wales from HS2. It just isn't viable. And to a lesser extent, you get the benefits for places like Cardiff. We're going to come back to Cardiff momentarily, and the fact that a lot of this is because it's falling into the trap of having a very Cardiff-centric view of Wales. But we go back to Cardiff. Cardiff gets a benefit from HS2 because arguably it's a far better and quicker connection up to the rest of the country. Ignore London. Far better, quicker connection to the rest of the country to connect to actually go over to kind of Old Oak Common and then connect up on HS2 to the rest of the country than it is to kind of piddle along on the Welsh Marches line, or even kind of going for the Heart of Wales line and getting up to Birmingham. It's probably quicker to go. It'd be interesting to look at the numbers. It's probably quicker from Swansea to let's say Birmingham New Street. I bet it's quicker to go Welsh South Wales Main Line and then Old Oak Common up than it is to trundle along the Heart of Wales line. So, yeah, exasperations. It's just not via anyone's trying to suggest that there is no benefit to Wales is just lying. They're just saying a thing to make a political point. Now, why is that an issue? That was time. That was the slide that I was hoping it was going to be. What of the arguments that there are no Welsh benefits from HS2? Well, here's Professor Mark Berry. Now, is it Mark Berry or Mark Barry? Have I gone? Where is he? Mark, where are you? Wait a minute. Let me not embarrass myself. It's Mark Barry. Sorry, Mark. Professor Mark Barry. This video is an interesting video. Go and watch it. I'll put a link in the description. It's a good video, actually. And as ever, with Mark and I, we agree on basically 95% of stuff. Like, I agree with most of it, pretty much everything he says. Very good proponent for sustainable transport in Wales. Follow him on Twitter. Lots of really good analysis. Mark and I agree on most stuff, right? This isn't some beef that I have with Mark over anything. That we agree on pretty much everything. Just this singular point, and actually I've commented on the video, I agree with pretty much a good summary, I agree with everything in there. The issue, though, it falls back on the fact that the reason I put Mark up is because a lot of the politicians and a lot of people who make the arguments about HS2 fall back onto Mark's work on the HS2 and Welsh devolution and funding. So this is why Mark's here. It's not because I'm beefing with Mark. I'm not beefing with Mark. I dare say if Mark and I sat in a pub, we'd pretty much everything we'd have to say to each other we'd agree with, and we'd have a great time. Solidly agree with pretty much everything Mark says, except the idea that there is any usefulness in tying HS2 into pro-devolution and pro-Welsh transport funding arguments. Now, why? So there's two blogs that Mark has written. These two blogs. One of them was back in 2020, start of 2020, which is Wales and HS2, and then there's a more recent one, just over a year later, which was as part of a submission to the Welsh Affairs Select Committee. These two, which is a bit more up to date. Now, both of these fall into the trap of relying on the Treasury's business case assessments of HS2, which comes right back to the fact that those that business case modelling that finds a big benefit for Scotland finds a disbenefit for Wales, mostly because of its disbenefit it finds for Cardiff, actually. So again, there's a bit of a bias here in that it's looking at Cardiff, it's exacerbating Cardiff central views of Wales. But that modelling is bobbins because it ignores release capacity benefit. Now, in Mark's video, he very sensibly explores why it omits that and why it's difficult to include some of that analysis. I agree with that. It's why I argue that Treasury business case modelling is not only not fit for purpose, but it shouldn't be used. You know, business case modelling is not a useful way to model major strategic infrastructure investment. That's kind of my running theme of the whole of RailNatter, is trying to push the case that business case modelling is not, that there needs to be. Lots of my episodes, you'll see, I'm talking about looking at demographics, looking at modal shift, using these as a way to derive the need for what transport should be doing, and then funding it on that basis. You know, I much prefer that approach than going, right, how much money do we have, and how can we pretend that that this analysis based on journey times justifies spending that money? It's just not. You know, we need to rip the system up. And so the problem with using Treasury's business case modelling, you know, the web tag modelling, the transport appraisal guidelines modelling, which is for the Department for Transport, which in turn is compliant with the Treasury's Green Book. So it's following the Green Book rules. The reason why this is absolutely flawed is, this Treasury, I just put up a picture of Treasury. Yep, Green Book rules, which so web tag, transport appraisal guidelines are DFT rules, which in turn are entirely at the behest of Treasury. Using that as a basis to argue the case for a better funding settlement for Wales is using Treasury rules to argue the case for changing Treasury rules, which doesn't make sense. That's not a good basis on which to argue the absolute good and proper and right case for more devolution and funding for Wales, for Welsh transport, and for other kind of, not just transport but other things, of course, but in this case transport. So don't use Treasury rules to argue the case for changing Treasury rules. It's not a good thing to do. It doesn't make any sense. Oh, it's 1953. I've talked extensively, and I'm going to explore it more and more, and hopefully more detail. I had so much fun when I did this analysis for the Welsh Railway Network. You know, I'm a strong proponent of the need for much more funding in Wales for Welsh regional transport. Well, I have this graphic kind of up reminding us of that episode we did. When was it? What should the Welsh Railway Network look like? one of the challenges you've got in this. Wait a minute, if I scribble on here, will it do anything? Oh, that's nice. Yeah. One of the challenges you've got is that the a lot of the discussion of transport in Wales centres around Cardiff. Centres around Cardiff and Newport, and to a lesser extent Swansea. It centres around the South Wales. A lot of the discussion is, and to an extent, rightly so. There's a huge amount of the economy of Wales relies on a powerful South Wales. Relying on powerful on the strength of that urban conurbation and the valleys feeding into it. But a lot of the discussions are focused on that at the expense of other very important areas. In particular, this area here, which is the northeast. Now, some of that comes into, as we discussed in the last... I don't know, it might have been just Rebecca and I discussing it after the episode, actually. We discussed to an extent, there's a limited extent of that, is a little bit of, well, are they proper Welshies up there? Because are they not just English up there? There's a little bit of that coming in. Not from Mark, not from the people at the top, I'm sure not from major politicians at the top, no. But there's a little bit of that can creep in, is undermining the fact that there's serious value to investing in the connections of the northeast of Wales as well. But also you can get lost a bit in the fact that, particularly in the HS2 benefits, is that you're thinking about the population and think about the South Wales Metro as a thing that's worth absolutely right to be invested in, right, at the expense of the value in looking at modal shift and the values of modal shift for pollution in those other parts of the country as well. So, a massive advocate for improvements. Also, Mark rightly is sceptical over the need for this bit here. The connection... I said this bit, sorry. The connection here from this bit here. This connection. Carmarthen to Aberystwyth. Mark is rightly sceptical of the value of a heavy rail connection there, as am I. As you know from this analysis, where I say that the investment, that if you're going to invest in north-south connectivity in Wales, which I think there should be that connection, it's this axis here. It's along the borders, basically. At some point, we'll do an episode where we look at exactly what that might look like. That could be fun. We might make it the next Crayon East episode, right? I'll just do it in the episode. Anyway, and indeed, Mark has done a fantastic blog. I'd recommend you go and read it about transport planning choices for what Wales needs to be doing, what the initial challenge is going to be, not just looking at South Wales Metro, but looking beyond that. And in fact, in that blog is where he talks about that the Carmarthen to Aberystwyth link is probably not worth pursuing. There are better things to be doing. So, lots of good, I argue vigorously for the, absolutely vigorously, super vigorously for the need for more investment, more devolution. So basically, for Wales to be able to make decisions about what Welsh transport should look like, and for them to have the funding to make those decisions stick and actually become a physical thing. But coming back to this tweet, coming back to the credible argument, bringing HS2 into it. So false arguments about HS2 taking money away from Wales, lies. False arguments about there being no benefits from HS2 for Wales. It's not true. It isn't true. We've shown that it is not true. The problem with bringing falsehoods into arguments with, if your arguments for more Welsh powers and funding are based on a lie, if you're using nonsense, if you're using things that are demonstrably untrue to make those arguments are not going to get very far. They're going to fall over. It's just not. It really is not a good way to make a very necessary and right argument about the mess that is Barnett, about the problems that are associated with Welsh funding, particularly for transport. So, lots of things in there that I've wibbled on about. If I go big face, any questions on that before we move on? Because, actually, you know what? Store up the questions, and we'll go through the questions at the end. We'll do the Q&A bit at the end. I'll do my end babble first, right? Let's get rid of my face. So, audio only form. Of the podcast. I didn't do that. I haven't done last week. Sorry, that's my fault. I forgot that I'm supposed to be the one who does podcasts, downloading and uploading now. So I'm a week behind. Sorry about that. It'll be coming up soon. Don't worry. And then I'll do this one as well. So they'll both come out at the same time. You'll get 2 Welshy episodes for the price of one, or indeed no price at all because they're free. Audio only. The usual ads. Patreon. I need to put on my lounge music for this bit, don't I? Anyway, Patreon. For patreon.com/GarethDennis to support this, to make more of it happen. PayPal.me/Gareth Dennis to support this, but just with loose change and without committing to anything, without any kind of additional benefits. The merchandise, if you still fancy it, I'm going to be putting a new mug up. Boris the Treasury mug is going up. Do make your mug suggestions. And GarethDennis.co.uk/Discord is where to go for basically more of the YouTube chat, which I have been paying attention to, not perhaps as much as you'd like, but I have been watching it. There's lots of chat going. If you want me to see your questions, at me, by the way. So from this point on, I'm going to be looking back through questions. So at my name, and then I can see your questions. It's nice and easy for me to see them. Another thing, a little tidbit. I have done a thing which hopefully makes RailNatter more accessible for new viewers. RailNatter collection playlists. I have done these. Now, can I make this work? So, if we go into YouTube, here's YouTube. Here's my YouTube channel. So, Gareth Dennis's YouTube channel, the home of RailNatter, amongst other things. Yeah, right. That's where this is. So, if you go down, I've changed this. So, at the top page, there's either actually, if I F5 this, I think it'll probably be. Oh, it's saying that it's live. Well, it is live. I suppose that's true. But normally, it's got the video of me on the sofa with Keeley. Anyway, the next one is RailNatter. Sorry, that was me thinking. I was thinking whether it was that video or whether I've put a RailNatter up as my hosted video. And also, if you're coming back to, if you're new to it, it has the 225 video, I think, still. Anyway, below that is just all of RailNatter, which starts with my really shonky pilot, which is dreadful, and then the increasingly less dreadful and a bit more professional-looking episodes. But given that I was like, well, is that the best introduction for people? I've started creating collections, which are hopefully useful, which are so it's these collections here, and I've limited them, so I think there's about 10 of them. So there's guests, there's actually if I click here, you can see all of them here. So yeah, there's guests, there's policy, there's engineering, there's history, there's network, there's miscellanea, challenges, myths, tours, calamities, and skills are kind of all the themes. I think I've got space for one more if I realise that I've not categorised a RailNatter properly. But what I've got is that every single episode has attached to it one or two of these, no more, just one or two of them, of these collections. So if you want to go in and watch all the ones that are about, for example, calamities, then you can do that.
This has all been built on.
That's me. Before I had squiggles around my face, and we've got things that involve calamities. If you want to learn about calamities, then they're included in there. If you want to, I can't go back because I've not got. Wait a minute, let me just back. There we are. If you want, there we are. Professional as ever. If you want all the guest episodes, then it's Mike. Hello, Mike. That was a while ago, wasn't it? Then you've got all the guest episodes in there, so you can watch all the guest episodes, in which there are plenty. I'm pleased to say. I need to have some more, but it's about half the episodes are guest episodes, which is nice. So I've created this. Hopefully, this is useful. If you have suggestions or whatever, let me know. But that's a new feature that I've added that you can go in and explore, particularly for new people. You can go in and explore kind of themes that you find interesting. So policy. So it's a bit of an explainer for all. A very quick explainer because I've busted the hour. I know. So I'm sorry. So guests is pretty self-evident. Policy is about. People might think, oh, those are boring ones. They're not. They're all, but it's where policy is a key feature, where I'm talking about tech context and kind of politics behind things. Engineering is generally like OLE, P-way, signaling, things like that fall into actually talking about nuts and bolts, goes into engineering. Trains as well go in there. History is pretty self-evident. Network is a bit more going into talking about the actual network, new bits, potential bits. Crane Easting goes in there. Miscellaneous is all the stuff that doesn't fit, so kind of all the random bits and pieces like Tim's episodes and various and specials and things like that. Challenges is essentially the weather versus the railways versus weather, the railways versus climate change episodes, plus a few others. Myths are things like Woodhead, Great Central, standard gauge. They're all in there. Tours are generally the live episode, the pre-record episodes where I'm somewhere. Plus, when I start doing more scenic rail tours, green rail natters. When I start doing more green rail natters, they'll be in there as well. Calamities we talked about, and then skills. There's not much in there. I potentially might change that, but anyway, at the moment, I want to talk more about skills coming up. So skills is a thing that I think will get more in there, but skills is in there as a theme. So it's a new thing I've introduced. Hopefully interesting. Hopefully a useful extra little bit for everyone. Any suggestions? I'd be. For anyone's sake, the guest collection. are also split. So there are two. So generally every video has two. So the guest ones, for example, actually we could just go and have a look. So if I let's go into guests. If I go into say
buses, cars, whatever.
And I
think one of the reasons
sorry, Mike, let's pause you there. So for example, if we go into let's go into Quails on Rails.
Applaud the fact you're on episode 28 and it's how
it's Dr. DT. But you'll see that in terms of playlists, this is on. You can't actually see it, but if I go here, you can see on my save to playlists. It's in the overall RailNet one, and it's in guests, and it's in history. So it'll do both. So there you are. That answers your question. So that's that. Hopefully that's useful. I'm not seeing any questions appearing, actually. Do send... Oh, yeah, there are some questions. I'll maybe scroll up to find any. So, next week, Samir Jerai is coming in. Jeraj, Samir, I'm going to ask you how to pronounce your last name. I should have done that before. Apologies. The collapse of Carillion. It's going to be an interesting one. We're going to talk about Carillion. And we're going to talk about whether... why is this coming? Why is this relevant now? We're going to talk about the significance for the industry, for wider issues and implications as associated with outsourcing. Pick through some of that, but Samir is going to kind of give an outline of what happened, and we'll pick through some of those themes. That should be interesting. That's the next episode. I'm looking forward to that one. So let's get my big old face back. Here it is. Oh, any questions from all of you? Let's go through. So we had quite a lot of reds earlier. I thought I was going to Crane East to Weatherby. Oh yeah, I will do Weatherby. That's a good point. Weatherby. We're going to do Weatherby. We're going to do Weatherby, or we're going to do out to Market Wheaton and beyond. I can't remember. Southwest Main Line west of Bristol Parkway is bad, even if it's electrified. Oh yeah, for sure. Why does Treasury do business case modelling for transport-related projects anyway? Why not the DFT? Well, the DFT do it, but the DFT do it according to WebTag, which is the Transport Appraisal Guidelines, which in turn are... Oh, yeah. Just noticed that it's actually a bit better, isn't it? I've not had these on. Oh, no, that is better. That is a bit clearer. I'm less jittery. There's more light. So WebTag are the Transport Appraisal Guidelines that DFT use to create business cases, which are in turn compliant with Treasury's Green Book. So, and ultimately, it's just done for Treasury. That's just Treasury have just outsourced that to the DFT. So that's why. Let's go up. Point was more. Okay. Let's see. Will HS2 take Edinburgh-bound trains off the East Coast Main Line? No. Why is it that the West Coast Main Line is the freight connection London to Scotland? Just because it's electrified and it's got the capacity. It's got more capacity than the East Coast Main Line. It's got the gauge clearance. It was W9 cleared quite a long time ago, so it's the natural. Simon's on here probably, so he can tell you in more detail. In fact, he might well have already done so. But generally, that's the container traffic route, which is the majority of traffic across the border is up the West Coast Main Line. Yeah. So what else? Let's go down to the bottom. What other questions have we got? Next week, what did people are asking about buffer stops. Buffer stops is going to be happening this weekend with about 20 people. I decided to press ahead with it, but just with half the number of people for COVID reasons to minimize the risk of spreading it about. So that is going ahead this weekend. So you'll be seeing that in a couple of episodes. That'll be episode 99. So I'm pre-recording it with a live audience. So that's a bit scary because it means I've got to entertain an audience. Oh, will I manage it? I don't know. It might be a disaster. Could I do an episode on the South Wales Main Line and how to improve it? Quite possibly. What order should we build other high-speed lines in? And should Wales and Scotland get prioritised over England getting more? I can't answer that. That becomes a politics question, not it becomes a question of politics over. It becomes a question of who. And a lot of the reason why Wales is getting fobbed off is because this current government feels like Wales is further away from independence becoming a reality, whereas it. Part of the reason why the 10 billion went to Scotland is because they knew if that didn't go to Scotland, it absolutely... that was happening at the time when in the run-up to the referendum as well. They absolutely knew that if Scotland didn't get a Barnett consequential, that it would really bolster the case for independence. So that has to be the key thing that you have to bear in mind at the moment, is that the Westminster and this government, particularly this really kind of English nationalist government, they realise that Scotland is a lot further down the road towards becoming independent than Wales is, and so they can basically they can fob Wales off. Also, the SNP feel like more not direct competitors. They feel more SNP Tory is an easier vote split. People are more comfortable. Tories are more comfortable voting SNP, whereas in Wales, the government, it's a Labour government, and Plaid potentially feel ostensibly more, even though it's not necessarily true. Plaid feel ostensibly a little bit more left of centre than SNP do. SNP are quite centre with a lot of new members who are pulling it leftwards. Plaid has always had a bit of a, again, perhaps incorrectly, it feels a bit more left adjacent. The government can just also want to just hammer. They don't necessarily see the benefits of just hard hammering Scotland, whereas they could just they want to hammer Wales because it's a Labour. They want Labour to look bad. They want Labour to look like they're suffering. Detour is answering questions that I've not spotted. Sorry, thanks, Detour. Yes, Labour. People say Labour is unionist. They are in England. They are in Scotland. They are at best agnostic to the union in Wales, and it's really important to realise that Labour in Wales is playing a much cleverer game than Labour in Scotland are, hence why they exist in Wales and they do not exist anymore in Scotland. Very interesting to explore the politics behind that, but probably for another day. Well, since no other HS2 questions have appeared, no one's got really angry in the chat with me about any of this, so I presume that people who are angry about it haven't turned up. But thanks for your time. That's been fun. And yeah, I'm going to go down and have some grub. I'm going to finish this half a mug of what was delicious but is now very cold. Cold tea is not drinkable. Cold coffee is doable. Cold tea, no. So we went from me being very happy about the tea at the start of the episode to me now being very sad about the tea, which feels like a good place to end. Everyone, you've been lovely. I'm looking forward to next week's episode. It's going to be fun. Informed guests is good. David, we've addressed that question in the Northern Ireland episode. Yes, so fine. Right. Good night, everyone. Good night. Please be standing for the Welsh national anthem. Ta-da!
Land of my fathers.